In this Hell Is Us video, I'm going to be talking about my hands-on impressions with the game. I got to play about 4 hours or so at Rogue Factor's studio in Montreal, Canada earlier this month. So in this video, I want to talk about what I learned during that session. And if you remember, this is a game that I played last Gamescom, but I was only able to publish a video at the tail end of last year. And it's one that I was very, very much looking forward to. So let's dive into some more with this game. So Hell Is Us is an action-adventure title that has a heavy focus on exploration and investigation. It's got some sci-fi-ish cosmic horror overtones to it. You can kind of see them present throughout the game. There is a lot of grotesque things in this game just from the nature of it surrounding a civil war in a country and a calamity that's caused these like supernatural beings to infest the areas that you sort of run into. Additionally, the combat of the game is kind of Souls-like-ish in nature in the sense that you have dodge, block, parry, stamina management. You do have some skills and things like that that as you acquire, you can upgrade your weapons. And your character will have a little bit of progression in terms of like trinkets and equipable items that can make you stronger. But there doesn't seem to be like any stats or anything like that. So it's not a true RPG in this sense, but it does have some character growth through those things. And you're often rewarded with those things through the exploration of the game, solving many of the game's puzzles. So as you spend the time and take the time to unlock a lot of these things, you're going to get more powerful as a character as well. Now, what's really intriguing in this game, and I spent quite a bit of time talking to the creative director about this, is that the game is not very hands-on. There is no mini-map, there's no map in this game. There is a compass that you can pull out occasionally and look at, which direction you want to go, but if you put it away, it'll go away off the screen. So you really have to listen and pay attention to the directions that people give you because there's no quest markers, things like that. There is information that you store in your journal, which kind of reminds me of like a Pip-Boy or something like that in terms of the way it looks UI-wise. But you have to remember a lot of things. We were even handed like a pen and paper when we were playing so we could take notes and write things down to remember where we'd been and where to go back to. Because like in terms of the secrets, there might be a door that's got like 2 things you need to open it and you might not know where they are. And when you do get them, you might forget where the door is. So you'd have to take notes and things like that. So this is very much an old school type game. He mentioned that it was kind of like a harken back to the 90s and games back then where they just made the game and you had to figure it out and come to terms with how the game played yourself. And it's a very hands-off approach. So while I was there in Montreal, I got to play about 3 or 4 hours of the game. I got to play the first area, which is basically the same area that I played at Gamescom. Then I got to play the second area of the game and see how the story progressed, how the game opened up into a more open world nature at that stage. And then I kind of teleported ahead in time to what they're calling a dungeon of the game. Apparently there are dungeons in this game that are kind of like inspired by Zelda or something like that. There are those types of dungeons where you'll explore them, find loot, and solve mysteries inside of them that are kind of their own contained experience. And I'll say the first 2 to 3 hours of the game are really, really strong. They really introduce you to the game very quickly. They get you kind of caught up to speed on the events that are happening around the main character, whose name is Rennie's life, why he's in Haiti exploring this civil war-torn country, and quickly introducing you to the effects of the calamity, which is sort of this cataclysm that's affecting the area, that's causing the sort of supernatural and cosmic horror events. You get into this very, very quickly, and you start to understand that there is much more going on than you first saw at the beginning. And the atmospheric storytelling between the music, the sound effects, the art direction of like the areas that you're exploring, these old ruins and kind of war-torn landscapes, they really set a dark, creepy, sort of cryptically horror setting that kind of is the overtone for the whole game. And one thing that I really enjoy about this game is that you know what Remy knows. Remy, the main character of the game, you don't know any more than he does. He's come to this country and he knows that it's in the middle of a civil war, but that's all he knows. He doesn't know any people there. He doesn't know who the good guys or the bad guys are, or whether there's a benevolent leader in charge of a town, or whether that person is a monster, what they're capable of. He doesn't know who he can trust and who he can't. And then on top of that, you have these like supernatural alien beings that are attacking him. He's trying to learn alien technology to combat them, and he's kind of thrust into a survival situation where he has to learn all these things on the fly and figure it out, or he's going to die really, really quickly. And as you talk to NPCs and gather more information, that information becomes available to you, and it influences dialogue options and things like that. So it's very much like a detective game in the sense that, like, if one NPC tells you, oh, I think I saw this guy over by the old mill, you can walk over to, like, I don't know, another NPC in the town and then ask them about the old mill. Where's the old mill? And that person will go, oh, the old mill is at the end of the marsh over there, past the freeway, blah, 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 blah. And then you get a sense of where that is and you can head out there. But until you got that other piece of information from the first NPC, you couldn't ask that question to the second NPC. So there's a lot of detective work in this game to really understand what's going on, and I really, really like that. It's very, very engaging, keeps you paying attention to the game and what characters are saying, and it's not hand-holdy at all. You know, in a day and age where games are just like, here's a quest marker, skip the dialogue, go to the quest marker, do whatever the, activity is that you've seen in 1,000 games. It's so refreshing to see a game that's kind of taken an old school approach that reminds me of like a board game or like Mansions of Madness or something, where you're like trying to solve what's going on using your deduction logic and then figure out where to go and go there. Now, this is definitely the strongest aspect of the game, to be sure, but I don't think it's an aspect that's for everyone. There is simply a lot to remember in this game, and unless you actually have a notepad or, you go to the wiki, which we're going to be doing, of course, and look up some of the things on there, you're going to be spending a lot of time taking notes, trying to remember what you were doing, especially if like you can only play like an hour or 2 hours, and then you got to go to work and come back from work and try and pick up where you left off, or maybe, you got to work for a few days and then you can play, trying to figure out what you were doing, where you picked up X, where Y door was. That can be very difficult if you don't have anything in your log that's telling you, because a lot of the puzzles in the game are not in your log, even though like the main quest data and some of the investigations and mysteries of the game, you'll find data about those as you learn it in there, so you can revise it and review it, so you can figure out where to go. A lot of the doorways and puzzles like that are not in there, so you kind of got to remember where they are, and I think that's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Now, on top of that, we've been made aware that 50% of the game is sort of the investigation, story-driven side, and 50% of the game is combat. So there is a good amount of combat in this game, and that was my experience as well. The first hour or two of the game felt like the pacing was almost perfect in terms of learning the game's mechanics, getting into the flow of combat, figuring out how to fight enemies, and you were always kind of like getting a little bit better and more knowledgeable and facing a little bit more challenge. And then you step into the second area of the game, and you're kind of like thrust on your own to like figure out where to go and what to do. I mean, you have the general objective, but that's where the game like really changes, in my opinion. And I wouldn't necessarily say it changes for the better in terms of combat. Like the exploration, I feel like, is great in that second area, because it's where the game really opens up and you can sort of go do whatever you want. You can follow the main quest and like figure out what that's going on with that, or you can just go explore some of the cool looking things on the landscape, fight some enemies, get some gear, level up your weapons, things like that. But in terms of combat, there are a lot of enemies on the landscape, like a lot. And luckily, the enemies in this game don't respawn, although there is a setting that you can turn on respawns for enemies, so if you die, they don't all come back. But I will tell you, when I first went out into the second area, the Akasa Marshes area of the game, the amount of enemies that I saw actually made my heart sink when I first went out there, because there were just so many of them, and the amount of time it even takes to even kill like one enemy in this game can be a lot of time, even when you're not in a lot of danger. Like even the most basic enemies take many, many hits, even if you've upgraded your weapons. And because of that, it can take a lot of time to get through those enemies. And it really makes you not want to engage in fighting as much as you really want to, I think. And this is not the only issue with combat, in my opinion, as well. I like the basics there. The foundation of combat is solid. It feels good. Parries feel good. Dodges feel good. The weapons all feel different. The attacks feel good on those. But the biggest issue I have, besides the fact of the amount of enemies there are and how much health they have, is that you have very limited skills in the early goings of the game. And because of this, a lot of combat just becomes attack, attack, block, parry, dodge, attack, block, parry, dodge, attack, block, parry, dodge. And maybe occasionally you'll throw in a skill. And those skills, at least the ones you get at the very beginning of the game, do not really impact combat in a huge way. So combat starts to tend to get repetitive, right? Like you start to you don't really have a lot of things you can do. You can use your drone a little bit here and there, and you can use a skill here and there, but the skills, in my opinion, are kind of underwhelming in terms of their overall impact, at least early on in the game. And on top of that, the enemy variety, there seems to be about, I want to say, 5 or 6 enemies that I fought in that 3 or 4 hours. And even when I skipped ahead to do the dungeon that was supposedly later in the game, I don't know how much further in the game it was, I found that I was still fighting the same enemies. So I really worry about the lack of skill variety, and I worry about the lack of enemy variety really holding this game back. Because remember, combat is 50% of this game. If combat was 25% of the game, it would be much less of an issue. If there were much less enemies and there was more exploration, I don't think it would be big of an issue. But considering that it's supposed to be half the game, I think, honestly, my concern for this game is really in the combat area and not at all in the story-driven exploration part of it. I think, honestly, what I would have preferred to see in the combat area is far less enemy encounters, because so the game could lean more into the aloneness and the creepiness of like what's happening, and instead making those less combat encounters more impactful in terms of the enemies that you fight, making them more horrifying or terrible, having them more attacks, making them, different. And instead of trying to go for the like, quantity over quality approach, I think I would have preferred to see that. I think it would be more fitting for the game in general. But we'll just have to see how it goes. I will say something about this game was that like one of the things in the second area is that you can get a blacksmith. This should sound familiar if you Dark Souls players out there. You can get a blacksmith, and that's what allows you to upgrade your weapons and add skills to them, kind of change properties on them. And if you don't find that blacksmith quickly, you kind of struggle in the game. That should sound familiar to you again. But if you can like beeline to that person and get them really quickly, then it kind of increases your likelihood of being successful in that area of the game. But since the first time you go there, you don't know where that is and where to go, it can kind of hamper you. And it's one of those games where like, initially, you might feel like, man, this is really challenging and really difficult. But once you start gathering information from playing the game, you start to realize how valuable knowledge is. Like if you knew where that blacksmith was and you got him, you could get him in 5 minutes. And then you'd be a lot stronger than if you messed around for 2 hours before going to pick him up. Now, I will say, I know they are working on combat balancing in this game. And I had a call at length with the creative director and executive producer of the game not too long after the event where I played. And on that call, I kind of laid out a lot of the concerns that I shared with you in this video, and they were very receptive to those changes. In fact, they had already made changes to the combat of the game that you will not see in this video because I have not played those changes. So they're very aware of some of these issues, and they are working on trying to make the experience as polished and as good as possible. So I think the combat, generally speaking, will be a bit different than what we're seeing in this build of the game, and I think hopefully, based on what I gathered from talking to them, that some of these issues are going to get smoothed out. Hell is Us is still very much one of those games that is on my radar for later in this year. There have been a lot of great titles that have already come out so far, but this is one that I'm still looking forward to in the second half of the year, and I definitely want to see what they do with the combat, and I can't wait to dive into the exploration and mystery that is Hell is Us a bit more, because that aspect still is really, really strong, even if combat needs a little bit of work yet. So what do you guys make of the game now, having heard some of these things, having seen a bit more gameplay footage? Is this one that you're still looking forward to in the second half of the year? Is it one that you want to see more of? Or is it one that, maybe hearing these things about combat has you second guessing? Let me know in the comments below.